Welcome back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And today we have a guest, so we are going to skip the intro. Emmeline Yang Hankins is with us today. She's a producer and a development consultant. Welcome, Emmeline.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We have asked Emmeline to come on today because we have something in common, which is that we all three believe that pitching is very important and that it is a skill that can be learned. And Emmeline has a pitching class that she offers to writers that she will talk about much later. So today we are going to talk about basically all things pitching. And Emmeline, I'm not sure if you know this, but we have a series on this podcast called Pitching is Terrible because we as writers, and I'm going to speak for like 99% of us, we hate pitching. We are writers. So generally, again, speaking very generally, we are somewhat introverted people. We are usually fairly shy. We are definitely like inward thinkers. To then ask us to go get a job by going into a room full of people who are usually non-creative people who do not speak the same language that we do, and then verbally explain to them the insanity that we see in our head is quite frankly terrible, which is why I'm very excited to talk to you today, because you kind of have pitching down to a science and are kind of fighting the good fight to help writers learn what that science is. So we like to start all of our guests with telling us like where you're from and how you got into this crazy entertainment industry, because everyone's story is so different.
Yeah, well, I started my career in London. I grew up in London, studied social and political sciences in college because it's not really anywhere in the UK that you can study film production. But I always wanted to be a movie producer since I saw Jurassic Park in like the mid-90s.
Yes, good company.
And I just always had my sights on making bigger movies and movies with scale. But I started in the super tiny British film industry right after I graduated college. And was actually lucky to work for companies that always had a discussion with Hollywood about financing. And so I was exposed to bigger movies from that point. And I began to specialize in script development. It was something I really fell in love with. And then I decided to spread my wings about 20 years ago. And I came out to LA to study at the Peter Stark program at USC. So that was my transition to Hollywood. And I learned producing from Larry Temin, who was the producer of The Graduate. He was chairing the Stark program at the age of 85. It was kind of crazy. So he was one of my incredible mentors. And then my first job out of Stark program was as assistant to the late great producer Steve Golin, who was the founder and CEO of Anonymous Content. And that was just the world's greatest producing education. I was so lucky to have it. I was Steve's assistant for 3 years, and then he promoted me on the producing and development side of the company. But I always learned about managing, and I'm passionate about helping guide clients and filmmakers through their careers. And script development became my thing there. And I worked on Spotlight, was one of the films I worked on with Josh Singer. Before that, we worked on a movie that not so many people saw called The Fifth Estate, which was about the story of WikiLeaks. And Benedict Cumberbatch played Julian Assange. Bill Condon directed it. And that was a very tricky adaptation. And looking back, I think actually the pitch for the movie wasn't super clear and highly complex. And that was the lesson. But we learned a lot of lessons on that movie. And then Spotlight, which is actually more straightforward as the pitch, I feel like we put a lot of our learnings into that movie. But I've always been a resource for writers, support to kind of help break a story from the beginning, really roll up my sleeves and get involved. I don't like to just skip notes and not be there for the solutions. And I take reading a draft very seriously. When it becomes more busy, it's challenging, but I prefer to read a script 3 times before I give notes, which is not always possible. But when I consider how much time a writer has put into writing the draft, I feel like it's on me to really understand that draft inside and out as much as I can.
God bless you. It took us months, maybe even years, to get that script on your desk. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I also believe that no one sets out to write a bad script. And so I always, if things are not clear on the page, I always like to say that I start every meeting with questions to find out what the writer's intention is. And whether I've been working with up-and-coming writers completely new to screenwriting, or experienced Oscar winners, I've always found that there's a gap between your intentions and what's on the page. There's always a gap. And my work is to move these two things closer to each other. And that's first and foremost my goal. So I try not to bring my overarching, I think it should be more like this, or I think it's more like that. If a scene isn't working or a sequence isn't working, or I don't quite understand a character, I like to ask a lot of sort of diagnostic questions first to say, what are you trying to achieve? How can I help you achieve that? And then depending on my role, if I'm potentially going to produce a project, I might say, would you be open to adjusting this part because I think it could work for this reason, the market creatively to find a director, whatever. But I really try to start with the writer's intentions and not assume that everything is on the page, because that always seems to be a pattern.
Yeah, I love that. The best producers I've ever worked with, that's their exact starting point. Is always, what is your intention and how do I help you get what's in your head onto the page in the correct way, versus like, I think it should be this kind of movie. Let's gear it this way. It's
Yes.
really great to hear that that's your starting point as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you always have that starting point, or was this something that over time you kind of developed and you're like, this is what's going to help the project best if I ask these certain questions, because you just kind of intuitively knew that's what had to be done?
I think actually came from working with writers consistently and beginning to understand their patterns. So it didn't necessarily come to me just reading scripts cold. It just became when I, worked, for example, worked with Josh Singer. If I got a draft and I didn't quite understand a scene, I knew he had it in his head or that it just wasn't reaching it on the page because obviously he's an incredible writer. So I would usually say, we're not quite getting there with this scene. So I feel like you have a better version, or I feel like, what is it you're trying to say? And that's where I kind of developed that line of questioning rather than saying, I think this should be this or this isn't working. It's like, how come we're not there yet? Because I knew he would get it there. So that's where it started, is being able to work consistently with writers, which is a real gift. A lot of the time, the challenge in film and TV is constantly working with different executives, producers, writers, and that's really hard. So then I began to bring that questioning to just working with any writer that I meet. And it makes the writer feel like I'm really trying to understand what they're doing, and establishing that basis of trust, I think, is essential, has always stood me in good stead.
Let's move into kind of how you got so invested in pitching enough that you created these classes for writers. What made you start to realize, this is the thing that needs to get worked on. This is the thing that I have, resources with which to help writers with.
Yeah, there was two things. The first is that in 2020, I jumped feet first into TV development, having been kind of back and forth across features. And I was lucky to do that with Amy Littman, who is a showrunner, incredibly sought after EP, who created Party of Five back in the day and also was the showrunners of Masters of Sex, and is just constantly in demand to guide a show and help run a room. She's just wonderful, and she's an incredibly fun, warm person. And I was able to immerse in TV development inside her approach. She was very open to me. I was her head of development, but she included me in breaking new ideas from the beginning. And what I noticed was that she would take a 360-degree view of the show right from the start. So, who is it for? What's its appeal? How is it? How is the action going to be driven? What are the character dynamics that continue to generate conflict? And then we were also learning in the market as it shifted from the peak TV era, in from 2020 to 20, well, it's the end of the strike. What we were hearing from Sony, where her overall was, is that we needed to have bigger backdrops and bigger hooks for shows. And Amy's a character-driven writer. She always jokes that she'd like to just have, a few people sitting around a kitchen table crying about their children. But we needed to have more. So it was also trying to harness different backdrops, to make a show more sellable. And so that was something we had to think of from the beginning. We had an idea about a father-daughter relationship. What was the bigger backdrop? We added a business to be that. And it was looking at it from the very earliest stages to say, is this show idea complete? Should we add something on? So that was really the first time that I started to think about the complete vision from the beginning. And then secondly, I graduated from the Peter Stock program at USC, and I've been teaching there for a few years. a career development class, but then they had an opening to teach TV pitching. And I said, sure, I'll do that. So I found myself constructing a class from scratch, and I taught it now for 3 years. And it was after the first year and really solidified in the second year is that I realized that the process of constructing the pitch and the format of the pitch is a really wonderful tool, even at the earliest stages of development, because it forces you to consider all these ideas. And you can have a great idea in your head, but when you're forced to spit it out into the format of a pitch and talk about tone, audience, the concept, the genre, all of those things, you start to fully flesh out your idea from the beginning. And it was partly by necessity, because in this class, which is for producers, not writers, they didn't even really, a lot of them don't even have an idea, and they're just coming up with one. But what was really interesting is by the end of 7, 8 weeks, they all felt like they had a fully fleshed out idea, having started with next to nothing. And so that has got me really excited about how the pitch can be used as a tool in early development.
Very interesting. Starting your idea with the pitch, because in having to convey it to someone else verbally and help them to see the scope of your idea, you're having to kind of build that ship as you're as you're kind of, I guess, sailing, right? So it sort of helps you kind of poke at the idea, and that's certainly how it works when I'm creating a pitch. Because when we create pitches, oftentimes, sometimes you're pitching your own material, but a lot of times you're pitching on a job that's like from scratch, right? It's like a blank page, and you are just inventing something from scratch. And yeah, I have definitely found I will do many, many, many drafts of my pitch, and each time I'm honing in on tone, idea, and I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even speak about tone. Let me get back into that section, right? So it's really cool that you are finding that people can actually generate ideas from a pitch stage. That's a pretty interesting lesson, I think, for writers.
Yeah, and I kind of stumbled upon that. And also it's some writers are able to sell just a pitch too. And that may be rare for an emerging writer, but that in itself is an exercise. Another graduate of the START program is Heidi Cole McAdams. And she came into my class and talked about, she created Death and Other Details on Hulu. And she came into the class and talked about how she and her co-writer created the show as a pitch. That's all they had. And so that was really interesting to see that the pitch was the whole idea. She didn't have a pilot script. And I think a lot of people assume that pitching is the endpoint to selling, to that stage of selling where you've written your whole pilot, you have your idea of your season and your series, and then you squeeze it into a pitch format. But some writers are selling just pitches. And so knowing that she, as an experienced showrunner, could do it that way and construct a show without writing the pilot script was really exciting to me as well.
Getting into sort of like specifics, because I do think a lot of the writers who listen to this podcast, we sort of have sort of two camps, I think. Writers who are up and coming, who are just starting to pitch for the first time, or maybe even getting into like their very first pitch. And then more experienced writers who are pitching a lot and really trying to pitch for their bread, right? And get their next thing. And so we're always trying to improve our craft in pitching so that we can get that next job. So what do you think makes for a bad pitch with writers?
Bad seems like such a harsh word.
I'm using it.
Yeah, I love that. I
Tasha.
mean, there are bad pitches for good ideas too. That's what I've learned, and I think most of the time we all have a great idea in our heads, and then we open our mouths and like this thing plops out, and you're like, "That's terrible." No, 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 it's not like that, really. And that's why I think it's most writers going in to get a job are going to have practice and rehearse their pitch, but that is really key, is to really know and choose your words carefully. The other big mistake that I find people do is to start the pitch by saying it's about and tell us what the character is, or it's set in the world of X. And I really believe that it's important to situate your listener from the beginning. Even if you're pitching something where it's an adaptation and they have told you ostensibly what they think the movie is or the TV show is, you should still come in and say a complete concept of your idea. And I like to situate the listener by talking about your basic thing of it's a half-hour comedy, it's an hour drama. I see it as being this type of show, and give some comps and sort of some tonal description, and then give an idea of how the show is going to work. So if it, and probably a touch of an idea of what the engine is, so that you have an overall concept of how the show behaves and the blueprint of the show before you jump into details. And I like to do this for two reasons. One is, if you have that blueprint, and I know that I'm walking into a horror movie or a horror TV show, then everything you say about this character that you have who encounters X and investigates Y, I'm then populating that by putting it into the blueprint of a horror series. So I'm already helping, you're already helping me build that without having to explain too much. Obviously, there's going to be your own twist on the genre and the twists and the reveals and all of those unique things. But just knowing which type of blueprint we're in really, really helps. And then the other reason I like to do it is, in all of my teaching, I try to bring the perspective of what it's like to be an executive or a producer listening to a lot of pitches, either back to back pitches, or you just got off the phone with your boss because so and so's dropped out of the show and you're trying to put out a fire. And then your assistant's like, you got to jump on the Zoom right now, everybody's waiting, or you run down the hall to a meeting, and you have to set all of that aside. I mean, even if you're not a busy person, it's very easy for one's brain to drift to, what are we having for dinner? That issue I'm having with my 10-year-old. And so I think it's really important just to help everyone ground at the beginning of the meeting and get comfortable and allow that transitional moment to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, set the world.
You very cleverly went into what makes for a good pitch.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Not what makes for. I wanted to.
So polite. We're brutal
kind.
on this podcast.
But really, like, what are some common mistakes that you do see writers make who maybe are newer writers who are just pitching for the first time? Anything from like staring at their page instead of looking at the, at the room, to like actually bigger kind of story mistakes that you might see people make.
I don't know. I mean, candidly, I don't know that I have like, here's the one thing not to do, because my main thrust, and this is what I've discovered in teaching pitching, is that if you situate your listener well at the start of the pitch, your pitch is likely to go well. This was actually observed by one of my students, having listened to 24 of his classmates pitch over 5 weeks, is that if you do that well at the top, then everything else can slot into that. I think that what I'm trying to avoid is for you to be talking and I'm wandering around trying to figure out what's going on. That to me is the death of a pitch, and it's hard to come up from that.
Here's what you've just walked into is, us writers are hard on ourselves. When Tasha gives me notes, I'm just like, just tell me the bad. I don't even want to hear anything good right now. So I think there we have this built-in, just like, what's the worst, what's bad, it's the negative. We need to change it, Tasha.
It's very abusive.
It is. Tell me why I'm horrible at pitching.
Well, I mean, I have, staked my career on being honest with filmmakers. I am always honest. That's something I learned from Steve Golan. I wrote about it in this thing called the Golan Rules that got passed around the industry after he passed away. And one of those things is to be honest with filmmakers. That is always going to stand you in good stead. It's much better to say this isn't going to work or this isn't as good as you can do. So I am very honest. I think it's hard for me to extrapolate an example across all pitches. But for me, the death of a pitch is when someone starts talking and I really don't know what's going on. And I liken it to doing a mental wander. So if you start talking about carrots, for example, and you're like, they're so delicious, like you're just gonna love it so much. And I don't know if we are talking about frozen carrots, canned carrots, or fresh carrots. I'm mentally wandering around the grocery store. And you don't want anybody wandering around while you're talking. That to me is death of a pitch. And then you sometimes can't come back from that, because then whoever's listening to you gets frustrated or even irritated. And then they just kind of write the whole thing off from the beginning. And so that is the number one mistake I've seen people make when pitching. I would say, related to that, another mistake I've seen is when people go into too much detail in their pilot synopsis. And I was fine talking about the pilot synopsis is tough for me to teach because it's very individual, but there's a very fine balance between going to beat by beat, which is too much, or even scene by scene, and not being able to summarize the pilot in a way that is concise and sets up the season. Oftentimes it feels like I'm just getting a synopsis of the pilot and not understanding how that sets up the show. And we all know that a textbook pilot sets up your entire show.
Yeah, it's interesting. What that example just reminded me of really interesting, great advice I got on pitching from Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who said that like the setup is so important. Like spend all of your time on your act one and your setup, and then the rest of the pitch is 5 minutes. Like just hit me with the feels and establish me in the place and what I care about, and then get the fuck out of there, basically. Let's talk. Can we talk about the confusing part that you mentioned? Because I agree that is the biggest hurdle that we face as writers, but it's also the biggest challenge when we are translating our idea onto a script in order to pitch to you. Is it makes sense to us, right? And we can thin it out as much as possible. We can get more succinct, but for us, it makes complete sense because it makes sense in our brain. So what are any like tips and tricks or ways that you teach how to be sort of less confusing in a pitch? Or just like maybe what are some common mistakes you maybe see with writers who do become confusing in their pitch? Is there something common in like why they are confusing?
I think that, again, from the common sense standpoint, is talking in a way where people can only hold a certain amount of information. So a common mistake with characters, for example, is to tell me about all of your characters. That is pretty stressful. I don't know if it's just my brain, but I can really only hold 2 to 3 character descriptions at once before I need you to go and talk about something else. So, and generally speaking, unless you are introducing a true ensemble like Friends, you do have to describe 6 characters in your pitch because they all have equal weighting, but you can go in through, say, Monica and Rachel because they live together and I feel like we're in their apartment the most. And also Rachel kind of kicks off the pilot because she comes in having run away from her wedding. So even when you have a lot of characters, you need to kind of portion them out like a great set menu. So it's like you get it in stages and everyone can digest them in stages. So even in a show like Sex and the City or Girls, you have a lot of characters, but one of their POVs is privileged. So you put them first and explain them first before adding in. And then the other thing that happens with characters is people tend to approach it as a list and describe each character discreetly without explaining the dynamics. And the thing that I've learned about TV over and over and about features is that a relationship needs to be a dynamic that produces storylines in and of itself. So you don't want to describe them as individual Barbie dolls on a shelf. They've got to be interacting with each other from the second character that you bring in.
That's great. That's super good advice.
And can I ask how you feel about writers who pitch with either documents or coming with a pitch deck, any sort of materials? Do you have a feeling about that one way or another? Do you give any advice on that one way or another?
Yes, I do. First of all, I think that visuals are totally welcome and they just need to be judged carefully, as in, I don't like it when I'm in a pitch and essentially I'm watching kind of a PowerPoint presentation, however beautiful it looks from Canva, because then the writer is reduced to a little corner and I really want to see your face and engage with you. So Amy Littman used to would just pitch in a very long-winded way. She will actually talk for 45 to 50 minutes, which is long. No one should pitch for that long. But we would break it up by going in and out of screen share and showing pictures and visuals at a certain moment. But where I really come down on pitching is that I'm passionate about figuring out the verbal way to pitch your show with or TV or movie without the aid of visuals. And the reason is this: when people leave the room after hearing your pitch, they're not going to have your PDF. They're not going to necessarily hold that up or put it up on a screen during the staff meeting when they talk to their boss and have to advocate for your show. They have to advocate for your show without those things. And your show needs to be pitchable in a few words as they go up the chain, as they go to the staff meeting, as they frame something, when they call their boss and say, I'm putting it on the weekend read, you've got to read it. this is why, and this is what is exciting about it, is they can't necessarily say the visuals are incredible, or I understood it when I saw how these things fit together. So your pitch really lives in words, and your writers, and that's the most important part. Also, sometimes when you email out a script and the pitch deck, sometimes those things get separated in email, or whoever has to read it wasn't listening properly and doesn't click on the visual deck, so you just don't have those things. So I think it's really important to feed the listener those words that you want them to carry forward. And that's why it's important to bookend your pitch with that kind of opening introduction and summary at the top. And then at the end, I like to use the last few minutes to recap the themes and how they play out in the show in a really specific way that I hope will be memorable. Almost like a soundbite, so they can say, this is what's exciting about it. And you've already kind of fed them that kind of slogan in a way, that kind of pre-thought about chunk of words, so that they can carry that forward and repeat it again.
I love that kind of conclusion, quick log line that you can give them as like, oh, okay, that sticks with them. I love what you said, and I think for me, like my manager often helps me with pitches, and she's also a producer. And when I practice pitch to her, she will often tell me, this is where I got bored, or this is where I got confused. And to me, it's perfectly interesting and clear. But when she repeats back to me, like the turn of phrase that like should be there instead, I'm always like, my mind is always blown, because as a writer, we love language, right? Like the more words, the better, right? But that's not, as you're saying, like that's not, like if that's our output, that's not what people are inputting. They're just inputting confusion if there's too much language. And it's also, what's interesting is that her language as a producer is not the language that I speak. There is like a producer speak that is just not our normal language. However, it is the language of very experienced writers, because they start to take on how producers speak, because there's a shorthand with how you convey your pitch. And I know the importance of language and pitching is very important to you. Do you think that can be taught, and how do you go about teaching that?
I think it can be learned by the experience of writing and rewriting your pitch, and also by listening to a lot of pitches. And that's something I'm trying to replicate in my independent teaching. At USC, we teach it over the course of several weeks. And after my initial teaching, I bring in a guest for each of 5 weeks. And we have 5 pitches in a night. That's a lot to listen to. It takes about 2.5 hours. We do on the spot feedback, and that's the feedback the students get. But it's by listening to other people pitch that really helps you learn to rewrite your own pitch, and then try to figure out better phrasing, as you said. And I think that, the students have said to me, like, wow, how did you come up with that so quickly? As you said, Tasha, your manager does. And it is because we've exercised that skill many, many times. And so I guess for writers, if you can help each other formulate pitches, and I know that you encourage people to be very collaborative and have community, pitching and listening to people's pitches and helping each other is just so valuable. And I think that's where it comes from. It's just a muscle. It is also, as you say, getting exposure to how the industry and executives talk to each other about pitches and movies and TV shows. It sometimes feels, I think, writers resist it because it feels reductive. I'm not just a product, I'm unique. Particularly, I've worked with a lot of directors. They're like, I'm not like anybody else. But when it comes down to it, when you're a tile on Netflix, Netflix will make you like somebody else. That's how it works. They will tag your product with all the tags that we know about. And they're kind of forensic. We know there are many different tags for a crime drama, for example, but they're going to do that. And producers and executives are going to do that from the earliest moment that your idea comes into their inbox, because they're just trying to grapple with the idea as they talk to other people about it.
Can you give an example of like how you might pitch? I'm trying to like a crime drama that I'm going to use one of Josh's scripts, okay?
Yeah, play. Bye. Go ahead.
It's like a father-daughter who go out into the woods to try to bond, and while they're there, a creature attacks, and father and daughter have to learn how to work together and overcome their differences in order to like survive this night of horror out in the woods. Like, sorry to put you on the spot here, but just as an example, like what kind of like keywords, like how do producers speak to other producers if they hear like a horror pitch like that?
I guess it would be, because I don't know enough about the idea, but these are the questions that I would ask, right? Is this story truly about a father and daughter relationship, in which case it's grounded in the father daughter relationship? It truly, everyone watching a father daughter story is going to feel it in their heart and be understand that the journey against the monster is an amplified version of the conflicts that every father and daughter goes through and surviving the journey of life? Or is it a father daughter, characters who happen to be a father and daughter, and we don't know too much about them? We're rooting for that family relationship, but it's really about the jumps and the scares and fighting off the monster, which certain horror movies are like that. So I guess, we use the word grounded a lot. We use the word elevated to signify that Josh's writing has that character skill and development that's going to make us really care about the characters, and maybe is even a movie for people who don't like monster movies, right? Is that because of the journey that we're going to go on with the characters, that it has that appeal, that in the way that I watched Pan's Labyrinth because it was such an emotional experience, but didn't really enjoy the scary parts because I'm not a scary movie person.
I love that phrase that you even just used. It's a movie for people who aren't monster movie people. You said it way better than I just did. That is an example to me of a phrase that I feel like writers don't typically think about, because we are so concerned about making sure we're conveying to you story, tone, pacing, character, and investing you in the story, that the thing that we loved about it, that we hesitate, or we don't even think to like take a step back and be like, how do I explain to them why people are going to be excited about this? So that is a really, really great example, I think, of like producer speak, quote unquote.
Yes. And I think it is also about saying what type of experience is the audience going to have. If you think about it, few people turn on the Netflix or Amazon or whatever and say, I want to watch a movie about two people running away from a monster tonight. I really love when that happens, right? And that's also not how people look for movies, right? They're looking for, we all heard about the audience and four quadrant audience, and that's not really what I'm talking about, because I find that gets really sad fast. But it gets exciting when you say, what experience do you want people to have, rather than just it's about this. And so thinking about the storytelling component, whether something is going to be illuminating, make you think twice about relationships, that kind of thing is, if there's an element that we feel is illuminating that we haven't seen it that way before, that's something we really want to talk about. So an example is, I like to talk about the show Fleischman's in Trouble, which I really enjoyed, despite not really liking to watch shows about sad marriages. Marriage and parenthood is hard enough. I don't really want to watch a show about that. I want to watch something like more escapist. For me, Marriage Story is like, I don't want to watch that marriage story. That's all there is to it. Like, no, thank you. But Fleischman in Trouble is so illuminating to me because it has this POV switch. So you start in Jesse Eisenberg's POV, and then Claire Danes is in the show. So you're like, well, there must be more to it than her just being a cow, right? And then after episode 3 or something, it just switches around the whole way. And for me, if someone pitched me that show, I would run out of that meeting so fast to be like, this device is so clever. And it's so cinematic, and it's the kind of thing you can only do in TV or film. I love this. And it illuminates the idea of marriage and the multiple experiences contained in marriage so well, in a way that only this show can do. So homing in on that element is almost nothing to do with who the characters are, where they live, any of that. It is just about saying, this is the concept and this is the experience. And truly, when I watched the show, my head was just blown open, because often in a show like this, women tend to identify with the women, or men identify with the man in a heterosexual relationship. And yet, by the end of the show, I truly had developed empathy for both sides of them, and was rooting for them to have a resolution, rather than being, she's a cow or he's awful, and that I thought was so human. And so that is something that if I were helping construct that pitch, or if I were repitching it, that's what I would home in on.
Yeah, I love that.
It's so funny you say this. I was just having a very similar conversation about the show Adolescence, which I have a young daughter, and I've refused to watch Adolescence.
Same.
And someone pitched it to me, and there was actually two different writers, and one of the writers pitched it as, oh, then this happens, and this crazy thing happens. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely never going to watch the show. But then the other writer was like, but you're missing what the essence of the show is about. And he kind of like went into different themes, and I was much more intrigued. I'm still not watching it, but I almost got there. But
Yes, I'm with you.
That's so super interesting.
Yeah, and adolescence has this huge device in it. And I think that oftentimes I don't struggle for an example right now, except for adolescence or Fleischman's in Trouble, perhaps. But these stories, when you really reflect, hold up a mirror to the hardest parts of human experience, like grief or like parenthood, and worrying about your child, or your child does something dreadful. It's hard to watch, right? And it's hard to get through, but using a cinematic device can give your audience a ride to go on that allows them to absorb that journey and to confront those things. And that kind of propulsive energy that adolescence has, again, I haven't watched it, but I've been told it has. That's a way to draw people in, and it's also a way to tackle a hard subject. So, for Spotlight, which was a very difficult movie to get made, took many, many years to get off the ground, the right combination of filmmakers. It's really hard to confront abuse of young children in the Catholic Church, a thing which is still happening and has happened for decades. And something that pained the journalists when they were working on the story was that it was actually still happening and they had the chance to stop it and they just weren't there yet. But what Spotlight does is it takes almost, I always talked about it as a sports team type movie where you are following a group of people who are really good at their jobs, very conscientious, try so hard, are incredibly diligent. You see some of the toll it takes in their personal lives, and you are just rooting for them to overcome all of their obstacles. And when they finally publish the article, you can feel a sense of fulfillment and happiness and achievement because they brought, and it was a big expose. It did get a lot of attention. It did change a lot. It was only one battle in the bigger war, but it allowed you to drop in on this very, very big and complex problem and feel good leaving the theater. So a lot of the times, particularly with true stories, people bring you a really sad story and you're like, but I don't want to drive people to the movie theater just to be sad. And also they're just not going to go. So having the device or a lens or characters to go in through, again, thinking about the pitch, you can say, well, what is the POV on the story that we all know? Like Pam and Tommy has the Seth Rogen character as an entry point, and that's what elevates an idea above being a Lifetime show where it's like just a true story, and elevating it to Hulu.
I'd love to go back to something you were kind of talking about a little earlier, which is sort of what your job is after you hear the pitch, right? So I would love for you to kind of give us a glimpse into where where for us the movie ends, cut, we walk out of the room and we never see you again, maybe. What do you do? Like we've come in to pitch you this idea. We're in the car and we're like, oh my God, we're talking to agents. And they're like, I don't know if I aced it, flunked it. I don't know. I have no concept. They were very vague. I don't know. And the agents say, okay, we'll check in with them. What are you doing after that pitch? How are you talking to your bosses? What is your obligation after you hear a pitch? Just kind of give us some insight there.
Well, let's assume that I like the pitch, but maybe have some reservations or there are some obstacles that I think people might have. I think it's a matter of if I want to advocate for something, and truly that's what I want. That's what everybody wants to do, is to advocate for you and this idea, is to very quickly think about why you're excited about it and why you believe in it, but also uh, defend yourself from possible issues that people are going to throw at you. So it's too small, it's too difficult, it needs a filmmaker, it needs casting. All of those things are what you rapidly assess. You're probably assessing them as the writer's talking, and that's like a horrible situation. It's just natural. That's how the brain works. And that's so usually you're saying, I want everyone to read the script based off this pitch that came in, or maybe you've read the script first and then you're advocating for it. But you are trying to get to the kernel of why this is different, why it, executives are always asking, why this show, why now? They also ask it at Sundance when you're applying to get into a lab. They're like, why this show, why now, and why you? So I have to make sure that if the writer hasn't given that to me, that I have that argument and why it is, I wouldn't say undeniable, because that's a word that has been overused and therefore devalued in the industry. Phenomenal and undeniable and propulsive. I did use the word propulsive earlier. I feel like every book agent calls me and tells me the book is propulsive, is to really hone in on that and say there are the ingredients for this. It's not that a pitch, certainly a pitch, has to be watertight. It has to be that there is something really special that can be developed. And I think that I don't want writers to think that it has to come in and be perfect, right? These days with pitching, and we've all heard that if you pitch to streamers in particular, they want to know the whole idea. They want to know the twist, the everything, what happens, the shape of the whole season. And so much work is being placed on writers at the beginning, and I think that's very daunting. And oftentimes writers feel like they have to figure everything out. And I think that's not necessarily true. You just have to have thought about it. So, so it's really important for me to say, okay, this is why I believe in it. The other things that writers aren't in control of is that the project has to be great and filled with potential, but we also have to assess where it fits into our slates, what I think my strengths are as an executive or a producer, and that packaging component. So can it be something that we have easy access to? If someone says, if we know that we're looking for something for a specific actor or a director, then that's an easy call. If we don't have the obvious one, have I been playing in that sandbox to have the right connections to put it together? Am I working with buyers? Do I have the right relationships for it to be the right fit? And that's something that, writers are not really in control of. Hopefully in tandem with your reps or a producer that you might be working with, you've identified places that are open and warm to your pitch. When studios call to clear a pitch, they are calling HBO and Netflix and so on. I don't know where this word clear comes from, but they're like, I'm clearing the pitch. And they call and they give a quick log line over the phone, or they send it by email and they're like, do you want to hear it? And that person usually says yes. But you've always identified, we're stronger at this place, but we're going to pitch this place anyway. And there's also always a hierarchy of buyers that people want to be at, where they don't want to be at. So that part of it, that assessment is outside, I would say, of the writer's control. Although if you can think about those elements and think about how a show fits into any streamer's lineup, that helps you give the executive the tools to think about those things rather than them having to extrapolate it themselves.
That's super helpful. So after you hear, because it's very common for writers to do pitches many, many times, because I may pitch to you and then you're like, I actually really liked it. Can you come pitch to my boss? And then I'll pitch to your boss and they're like, okay, great. Now you have to pitch to so-and-so at the studio. And we're doing the pitch like five different times. So like in that conversation of, I really liked it, that you're having to your boss, what does that typically look like? Like what is kind of like the language that you're using, or what are the things that you're trying to convey from that hour-long meeting you just had with the writer in a very succinct, probably 5-minute conversation to your boss?
Again, there's all of those things that the concept that is unique to the pitch, why an audience is going to watch it. So not necessarily who the audience is, but what the experience is. So is it suspenseful or is it a slow burn? Is it character driven? And oftentimes in the conversation with a superior or even a colleague, they're going to be saying, well, is it more, if it's a international crime drama, they'll say, well, is it more like Homeland, or is it more like I can't think of an example, but it's a kind of diagnostic questioning to say, is it more like this or is it more like this? So I try to come up with, if the writer hasn't fed it to me, as clear an example of, it's more like It's got the bones of an Ozark, but it's wittier like Better Call Saul, or it has a bit of absurdity. So it is really mainly about not so much what happens in it, but landing the kind of the target of where it sits tonally, because we want to know how it's different. And so that's why all those conversations about tone and also how the narrative works. So if it is a crime drama, is so True Detective, for example, has a big investigation in the center of it, and it is a big mystery, and the atmosphere of that mystery is very important, but and very well plotted, I would say. But the obviously we know the characters, the detective characters in True Detective, their interactions, their home lives, and how their home lives get mixed up in their everyday work is as important as the investigation. And so I will convey what balance of investigative and character there is. Whereas a show like Mayor of Easttown, which I know, and I love both shows, Mayor of Easttown, to me, the investigation is somewhat secondary, even though there are investigation beats in every episode. I've discussed that show with friends, and if you look at it for too long, it kind of falls apart. There's some slightly obvious story beats, like someone finds a photo. Who prints photos out anymore? And why would she do that? But that's not really what matters. You're really there for the character of Mare, the incredible relationship which she has with her family. It's so wonderful to see kind of a working class family in this area of Boston. Is it Boston? Who, and how they interact, and for it not to feel like really negative and sad and like poverty porn. It's really warm and encouraging. And she has putative relationships that aren't always successful, but they're not crushing and miserable. And that, to me, if that was present in the pitch, that would be something I would be really eager to convey, is that we're seeing a slice of life that does look into some dark corners of humanity, but you're not going to feel like really crushed at the end of it. I think a lot of people watched True Detective and felt very haunted afterwards, and they welcomed that. But I would be at pains to say it does hold up a mirror to humanity, but it does it in a way that's light. The family talks to each other in a way that's critical but warm and supportive. So you're not watching a show where everyone's super depressed, which is why I'm trying to say that is we're going to draw an audience in. People are going to want to watch the show because they're going to talk to each other about the characters, even though it is an investigation. So maybe that seems sort of long-winded, but when we're excited about something, we really are passionate about conveying that experience to whoever we want to advocate to.
I love that. Even just some of the language you used in there is like, oh yeah, that's not writer language. It's really good to remember. Like that's how we can convey our ideas a little better, especially up front as we're just kind of like setting the scene for everyone. That's really great.
I can talk a little bit about how to find that language and how to advise about that.
Yeah, please.
So one of the ways that I suggest writers learn to think industry speak is to read reviews. It's much easier for reviewers and critics to pitch a show in hindsight because they've seen it, they've seen the finished product, and all of the creators' thinking is already present in there. But they're often using language that we would use to convey a pitch right at the beginning. So reading reviews in places like Variety or Deadline, and then moving into more like culture pages like the New York Times or Vulture. They are very good at conveying. I find the more elevated outlets are really good at pitching a show because they often write in the idiom of the show to kind of convey the tone of it. The best critics do that. They're not just like, is it good or bad? They want you to know what it's like. So that is a way to get practiced. And then if you have a show that you want it to be like a certain show or like a certain creator, then go and read reviews about how people talked about that show. And you can borrow phrases or say, oh yeah, I really want to speak to this element in this way, and then find your own phrases to do that. So the worst thing for writing, and I have to write a lot, it's like I write pitches, I write ideas. The worst part is just sitting there with nothing to bounce off. And reading about other shows, I think, is one of the best ways to gain those phrases and that toolbox of vocabulary.
That's a really cool idea. I've never thought of that. I love that recommendation. You've already given us, I think, like a workshop on
Yeah.
pitching already, but
That was amazing.
you also have a workshop. You have a class that you teach outside of USC for writers. Tell us more about what that workshop is and what writers would do in that workshop and what they'll learn with you in that time.
I have a class I call Kickstart My Pitch. It's kind of my signature pitching class. It's a 2-hour class. I do it online. And it's kind of soup to nuts. I convey as much as I can in those 2 hours. And I've thought about stretching it out over longer, but I feel like writers really benefit from getting the full download and then trying to apply it to their own work. I'm also developing a 4-week workshop where writers can bring in an idea and then we'll work on those elements week to week. It's structured differently to my USD class, so it's a completely different experience. But that would be a small group. I'm aiming at 4 to 6 students, and I'll run it for the first time over the summer. So I don't have the dates for that yet, but I do have June dates for Kickstart My Pitch, and I'd love to offer a discount to Act 2 listeners. So I set up a private page. You go to talktom.com. That's my website, talktom with 2 M's. talktom.com/act2, all one word. And there'll be details on how to hear about classes and get the discount.
Amazing.
Yeah, we'll throw that up on our social media, obviously, as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's something I'm running currently, and then the pitch workshop will come. I'm also working on a workshop that I'm calling Rewrites, which is there are lots of workshops for rewriting your script. And again, what I'm trying to bring is all the lenses and frameworks that we bring as development executives. So really thinking about moving your idea forward and not simply working on character or improving the pacing, is trying to bring all of those lenses over that essential work, which in some ways I often think I'm not necessarily the person to help you fix your 3-act structure, but I can bring all of these other things to the table, particularly if you want to make your movie or TV show feel more like those things, and make sure that you are meeting your intention on the page. That is something I'm working on. And I've been interviewing development executive friends and recording our conversations and then kind of pulling out, like, what are the things we all think about when we are developing a script? And I know many. I think that sometimes studio executives, development executives can get a bad rap, but I know many producers and executives who are so passionate about development and really try to be an ally to writers. And so those are the people I'm talking to in trying to funnel this wisdom out. So that's kind of my whole MO.
I love that. I love the rewriting workshop as well, specifically with that intent, because, we, of course, advocate for all writers to find writers groups and friends who can help them. But there is a difference between having a good script and being able to get a script over the line and getting it green light ready. It's just sometimes there is a different language. There's different things you have to consider that comes with just experience in doing it. And speaking with producers like yourself who have that experience and can really be like, this is a great scene objectively, but to make it a movie, it has to be this, can really help writers transform their writing abilities like exponentially. So I love that you're also offering that as well. So yeah, we'll definitely post about this. We love what you're talking about. I'm already going to steal a couple of your ideas, especially like the conclusion idea at the end of pitches. I leave parties awkwardly. I leave pitches awkwardly. So that's definitely
We've all done it.
my thing.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I'm trying to avoid all of us from having those experiences of just like, okay, I got to the end of my pitch, so yeah, that's it.
Done now, the end.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for spending the time talking through all of this. I struggled to ask questions because I was just listening.
Same. I was kind of lost in everything. It rarely happens. I'm like, oh yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I love talking to you guys and would love to chat with you guys again.
Amazing. Us too. All right. I'm going to end with the quote of the day. One day I will find the right words and they will be simple. Jack Kerouac. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram.
And I am Josh Hallman on Instagram. And Emmeline, where can we find you?
If you want to be found.
Yeah, if you want to be found.
Find me at Talk to Emmeline. That's EMMELINE. I'm on all socials.
Perfect. Thank you.
Amazing.
As always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.